Hi guys, I'm AJ and today I'm going to show you how to repair a rip in your favorite puffer coat or winter jacket. After we finish the repair, I'm going to show you how to make your jacket, the back of your jacket, look like a fall 2016 Schiaparelli puffer coat, like this. First half of the tutorial where we just fix the tear, you're going to need a like color thread and a needle. Second half, you're going to need a pen, paper, contrast fabric, pins, needle, and thread. If you're like me and you have access to a sewing machine, we'll also be using the sewing machine. However, this whole entire repair and upcycle could be done without a sewing machine required. First things first, you're going to want to lay your coat flat. My tear happened down the back of my coat. So as you can see, there is some fraying of the material. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to snip some of the fraying off. Next up, I'm going to unravel about an arm's length of my thread that I'll be using to repair, and I'm going to cut it. I will now thread my needle, and after pulling the thread through, I will make a knot on one end. After making one knot, I'm going to make a second knot directly on top of it. Now I will come to where my tear is and find the bottom of my tear, and I will insert my needle on the inside of the tear and pull up. Before I do this, I want to note that when I do this repair, I will only be going through the outer shell of the material. We can see on the inside that there's this puffer material. If we puncture all the way through, that could make it so that wind is going to come all the way through the jacket and you'll get a little more chilly because there'll be more holes from punching the needles all the way through. Now that we've established we'll only be doing a repair on the outer shell, come to the bottom of your tear, and then about 1/4 of an inch in from where the tear is, you're going to push your needle through and pull it all the way until the knot stops you. And then you'll tuck the tail of your knot inside the rip. You'll go to the other side of the rip and you will insert your needle there about 1/4 of an inch or even a little less over. And you'll pull that all the way through. What you're doing to repair this is going to be called a whip stitch. So you're going to repeat that process again by going to the right side of the tear, pulling your needle through, and then straight across going to the left side of the tear. And when you pull, it'll begin to wrap around the tear. So you can see here, I began folding in the raw hem so that none of it is exposed. Down here towards the bottom, I was struggling with that a little bit, but as I got to the top, I was able to cleanly fold that raw hem in. And now I'm continuing to do the same process where I loop around and bring the needle out the other side of the tear, and then I pull it tight, doing a whip stitch, which is just basically going around and around the area that is torn. So I'm starting on the one side and then I'm going over to the other one. I'm going to pull that taut and just continue along with this process. Look at how neat that stitching looks all the way up. I'm going to show you how we can knot off this first portion, and then we'll cut the thread and talk about what we're doing over here. So at the top here, where my last stitch is, I'm going to take my needle still attached, and I'm going to put it under that last thread. I'm going to pull my needle up. I'm going to pull it until there's a loop, and then I'm going to circle my needle under that loop and pull that down. I'm going to repeat that one more time. So I'm going to go under the last stitch, pull my needle and thread through until there is a loop, and then I'm going to circle my needle through the loop and pull it down. So now we've just made a knot in the last stitch, and I'm going to take my scissors and just snip that thread off. Now we're going to get into where this very jagged part is, where there's a lot more fraying. And then after we repair that, we'll go straight across and repeat the same process we did down this vertical part to the horizontal part of the rip. Take your needle and thread your needle. Once you pull your thread through, you're then going to tie a double or triple knot on the thread. So that's one knot. And then you're going to make sure that second knot goes right on top of the first knot to create a bigger knot. Now to repair this jagged part in the middle, what we're going to do is I'm going to take the outside of that rip and I'm going to fold it in a tiny bit here and layer it slightly over the raw hem of the other half of the rip. And I'm going to put a pin in to hold that edge. I'm going to take my needle and my thread with a knot at one end of the thread, and I'm going to come up to the top part of where that rip is, and I'm going to come through from the inside of the garment on one side of the tear. I'm going to pull all the way up, and then I'm going to go to the other side of the tear and I'm going to do a whip stitch once again. So I'm going to go from one side to the other side of the tear, making my stitches as close as possible, and then pull that through. And I'm going to repeat the process by going back to one side and pulling the thread all the way through to the other side. I'm going to keep repeating that process. When we get to the bottom of this stitch, we're going to loop around the last stitch that we just made. So we'll go through that last stitch, pull almost all the way through, but leave a loop. And then we're going to go through the loop to knot off that last stitch. And you guys already know I like to repeat that process one more time. So we're going to go under the stitch, make a loop, go through the loop, and pull that down. And now that should be nice and secure. So we're going to take some scissors and snip that. To finish repairing this rip, we have to do the horizontal part of the rip, which is going to be a very similar process to how we fixed these two vertical parts of the rip. So I've gone ahead and I have rethreaded my needle and made a triple knot at the bottom of my thread. Go to the inside of the rip and I'm going to pull my needle up and through. I'm going to tuck the knot and the tail of my knot inside of the garment. I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to lay this rip flat, and I'm going to tuck the raw hem of the rip inside the rip, trying to get it as flat as possible, overlapping with the bottom lip of fabric. And once I have that laid pretty flat, I'm going to add in a little pin to hold it in place while I start stitching. Now that I've pinned that down, go ahead from the bottom of the rip to the top of the rip, and I'm going to begin stitching it together using that same looping ladder stitch. Now that we've stitched across this seam, we are going to do the same process as before. We're going to take our needle and we're going to loop through that last stitch that we made, pulling it through to create a loop. And then we're going to double back through that loop and pull this down to knot it in. And we're going to do that process one more time through that last stitch and loop the needle back through and knot it down. Our scissors, and we're going to cut that excess thread. And there we have it. a repaired rip on a puffer jacket. And as you look further away, it does become harder to see. In part 2, I'm now going to show you how to make it look like this. This is a Schiaparelli Fall 2016 puffer coat, and I love their use of hearts and butterflies in the puffer design. So I'm now going to show you how to make a puffer patch to go over the ripped portion of our puffer coat. You're going to need a pen, paper, contrast fabric, pins, needle, and thread. If you're like me and you have access to a sewing machine, we'll also be using the sewing machine. However, this whole entire repair and upcycle could be done without a sewing machine required. For my patch, I'll be using some leftover silk. First thing you're gonna need is paper to draw out my design. Whether you're doing a heart, a butterfly, or a star, those are all symmetrical shapes. So I'm gonna recommend you fold it in half. And then if you're drawing a heart, you would just draw the heart. If you're drawing a butterfly, you would just draw the butterfly in. So after drawing out my design, take my scissors and I'd recommend cutting it out between 1/2 inch and 1 inch bigger than you anticipate needing. Now we can see when we lay it on the jacket that it's going to take up the whole area that I would like it to. So there's going to be a mini heart, a medium heart, and a big heart. We're going to cut one version of it out of muslin or a lining fabric, and then one version out of our top fabric. Now for the middle heart, we're going to make a slightly smaller heart out of our base heart pattern. After we make the second heart, we're then going to make a third heart, which will be even smaller. As you can see here, I traced out the 2 other hearts, and I'm going to cut the medium one first. Take the fabric for my medium heart, place the heart down. I'm going to trace that out, making sure I leave a little seam allowance. Now we're going to repeat that whole process one more time to cut out the small heart and the large heart. Now that you've cut out a lining piece and your top piece for each of the shapes, what you're going to do is you're going to take your lining piece, lay that flat, and then you're going to take your top fabric and you're going to put it good side facing down into or onto the lining piece. We're going to line that up and we're going to pin it down. I have it pinned all together. I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine, and along the 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, depending on your seam allowance, I'm going to sew the whole perimeter, but leave a 1 to 2 inch gap along one edge. Now I've sewn around the full heart, and now that I've gotten to the end, I'm going to leave this gap right here. I'm going to repeat this same process on our smallest version of our pattern, in my case a heart. So I'm going to take the good side of the fabric and I'm going to place it good side facing down and then pin these together and leave about a 1 inch gap on the bottom. We have our small, medium, and large heart, and we're going to use that gap to turn them inside out, or I guess right side in actually. So we're just going to pull. It's going to take some finagling. I'm going to use the back end of a pencil so to insert it in the hole that I left, just to pull out some of these seams here. And then we're going to repeat that process 2 more times. This is what they look like after freshly turning them right side in. And now we have to attach these 3 together and get them a little puffery. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the mini heart to the medium heart. Still going to leave a little bit of a gap on the side. And I'm going to try to make sure that none of the white lining from our lining fabric shows. Go ahead and apply a few pins. Apply one here. I've now attached the first heart to the second heart, and I'm going to repeat that same process and attach the middle heart to the biggest heart. I'm just going to have to change my thread color back to white and make sure that we place this so we don't see any of the lining. Reason for that is because we're going to take some scrap fabric and we're going to rip it up, make it smaller, and we're going to use that as stuffing to get that puffy feeling inside of these shapes. And if you happen to have batting or some sort of like stuffing for like stuffed animals, you could stuff those in instead of scraps, but I like to be as sustainable as possible. And now we have attached the middle heart and the mini heart, some scrap fabric. Now I have a bunch of fluff, and I'm going to begin stuffing some of that stuff inside the heart. Use this pencil to kind of move some of the stuffing around in there. And once I get that first heart filled, I'm going to move on to the middle heart. Now that I've stuffed it full, so you can see here at the bottom of each of the hearts, we're going to have to tucked unfinished, and then we can either go to our sewing machine and do a little top stitch over that section, or we can hand sew it closed. I'm going to pin it flat, and I'm just going to hand sew it. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this little black heart. And I have my black and white thread. I just finished sewing down the champagne section, so now I just have the two silky black sections. Started by threading my needle, and then I'm going to make a double knot. You can see there we've made a bigger knot. And since this is going to become a patch on the back of our puffer jacket, we don't really care what the back of this looks like. So I'm going to go all the way to the back of the patch, and I'm going to push up from the back through to the front. And you can see that I have a pin holding the edge that we need to seal closed. So I'm going to pull the needle all the way through, and I'm just going to do like kind of a back and forth hand stitch along the edge. So I've now reached the point machine stitching begins and my hand stitching ends. So I'm going to do one extra stitch over to where the machine stitches are. Pull this all the way through the back of the patch we've been making. Flip the piece over. What I'm going to do is I'm going to catch a few threads of the weave, if you will, and I'm going to pull the needle through a loop. You can hold it with your finger, back through that loop, and pull down. And that little knot that I just created, I'm going to go through it one more time with my needle, and then I'm going to go back through and pull it flat. I closed off the third opening using the same exact hand stitching process. And now to take your puffer jacket, you attach the patch to it. You can see here where in part one we did the repair. Flatten out my jacket, place my patch, take a few pins. If you want to get this done quicker and you don't care about puncturing all the way through to the inside layer of the coat, you could do this with machine sewing, but we will be using hand sewing. Start just by pinning it in a few places. Final step, which is going to be sewing this patch to the jacket. Two things we want to remember here is that we want to make sure we pull the black satiny top part of the patch over the white part when we're attaching it, and that we only attach the patch to the top layer of the fabric so that we don't affect the integrity of the insulation by puncturing all the way through to the inner shell. So to hide the knot on the end of this thread, the first thing we're going to do is pick up just the edge of the patch, and we're going to put the needle from the side that faces inwards up through right at the edge of the patch. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the needle through the black layer, and we're going to pick up just the top layer, make sure we pull it away from the inside, and then we're going to push the needle back up and back through the satin fabric of the top, and we're going to pull all the thread through. One more close-up demo. So what we're doing is we're going through the top black satiny fabric, through the top layer of the coat, and then we're pushing the needle back up in a scooping motion through the black satiny fabric, and we're pulling the thread through. As you can see, I've gotten halfway around the heart, and I'm now gonna knot this down and then rethread to finish. I'm pretty happy with how it looks so far. You really can't see any of the white underlining and on the inside, so you can't see where any of the stitching is, so we haven't punctured through at all with the hand stitching. So to knot this off, I've pulled the last stitch I'm going to do taut. I go around the outside of the patch to the edge of that stitch, and I'm going to pull the needle through, make a loop like I normally do. I'm going to put the needle through that loop and pull up until it ties into a little knot. Pull that taut, and then I'm going to go through one more time just to double knot it. Now I'll rethread this needle and I'll continue on with the same stitch. And there we have it.